We are all aware of the unfolding crisis in northwest Syria.
People are fleeing under horrendous conditions.
This dangerous situation must be de-escalated.
It's causing unspeakable human suffering.
We're all sitting on the sidelines as people in Idlib get slaughtered.
This is The Hot Zone. Engaging with the news in a whole new way, international war correspondent Chuck Holton brings insight into areas of crisis and lets you help those affected.
More than 30 Turkish soldiers died and 70 wounded inside Syria during the latest battle to control the heavily contested town of Idlib. Turkey retaliated with airstrikes and artillery, causing dozens of Syrian military and civilian casualties as well. As the fighting heats up, Turkish President Erdogan is focused more on Russia than the Syrian forces.
I said yesterday to Mr. Putin, what are you doing here in Syria? Now get out of there and leave us alone with the regime, and we'll do what's necessary with them.
European leaders have long feared Erdogan would weaponize the more than 3 million migrants living in his country by sending them north, and now it's happening.
What did we say months ago? If things continue like this, we'll be forced to open the gates. They didn't believe what we said, but we did that yesterday.
The European Union urged restraint, warning the conflict could get worse.
The ongoing escalation around Idlib is a very dangerous escalation and needs to stop urgently. There is a risk of sliding into a very dangerous and major open international military confrontation. So we are urging all parties to de-escalate, to stop the ongoing hostilities and ongoing confrontations. Not only because it's causing a lot of destruction, but it's causing unspeakable human suffering of the civilians, mainly the civilian population in Idlib, which then turns into refugees and is pushed further either to Turkey or then from Turkey away.
Europe's worst fears are being realized as Turkey throws open the floodgates and tens of thousands of refugees are now mobbing border crossings with Greece. Troops and police are trying to control the border, where riots have broken out with migrants, most of whom are from Iran, Afghanistan, or North Africa. The U.S. and NATO are standing behind Turkey for now, but it's clear this is an uncomfortable position.
We are strongly supporting, and NATO allies are engaged in trying to move forward the efforts, the UN-led efforts to find a peaceful solution. And we call on Turkey, we call on Syria and Russia to fully engage in such UN-led efforts to find a peaceful solution. This dangerous situation must be de-escalated, and we urge an immediate return to the 2018 ceasefire to avoid further worsening of the horrendous humanitarian situation in the region.
Folks, once again, I feel like the media is shortchanging you on the information you need to know about what's going on in Syria right now. Things are really heating up, and as bad as it's been in the past, as bad as it was when I was there back in November last time, it's even worse now, and this thing could really blow up into a major war. So I'm going to show you what is being said by experts in the field, by people from the World Health Organization, the UN, the NATO, and Mike Pompeo and others about this situation right now to give you a much better understanding of what's happening on the ground between Turkey and Syria, Russia, Iran, Hezbollah, the Turks, everything all together in that toxic brew that is Syria today. Check it out.
We are all aware of the unfolding crisis in northwest Syria and the terrible human toll on civilians. Nearly 900,000 people, the vast majority women and children, have fled in the latest fighting under the most tragic circumstances. Hundreds have been killed, many have been uprooted multiple times, and young children are freezing to death. The fighting is now advancing into areas with the highest concentrations of people, including the displaced, and threatening to strangle humanitarian lifelines. International humanitarian law and the protection of civilians have been systematically ignored. As the space for safety shrinks further, the potential for human suffering grows worse. An estimated 2.8 million people in northwest Syria require humanitarian assistance. Earlier this month, we thought we would need to reach 800,000 people displaced by the recent and ongoing violence. Now, something much greater is required. We are revising our plans and issuing an urgent appeal to donors for an additional...
Consistently, since the previous administration's decision to allow the Russians to come into Syria, that combined with the long history of Iranian influence in parts of Syria has led us to where we are today. You can see with the Israeli strikes that are taking place against Iranians in Syria, you can see the work that the United States is doing in the north and east. We have an enormous Iranian problem inside of Syria. These attacks that are Syrian regime-led, Iranian-supported, Hezbollah-supported, underwritten by Iran, along with the Russians, are now causing a humanitarian calamity in Syria that once again re-ups what we saw several years back. The numbers range from 750,000 to 1.1 million people in that upper northwest part of Idlib province, many of whom will be displaced, too many of whom will be killed. And our mission set has been diplomatic to urge the parties to a ceasefire, both bilaterally with each of the participants. We have a UN Security Council resolution that sadly the regime will not adhere to, that the Iranians will not adhere to, which was designed to find the political resolutions, UN Security Council Resolution 2254. We've not been able to make progress there. So in light of that, we have done what we can with American assistance, stabilization assistance throughout the region to try to lend both food and assistance and medical through USAID and to try and build back some of the institutions so that they'll be capable of pushing back against what the Russians and the Iranians and the Syrians are doing in this hellish place of Idlib.
The needs are far greater than the NGOs or the funding that's there now. And so the United Nations will not help anybody who is not in a United Nations camp controlled by the Assad regime. Mm-hmm. Well, many of these people fled the Assad regime before they even fled the Turkish attack. And so they don't feel safe there. And so what we need is support for camps in northeast Syria that are not controlled by the Assad regime.
I'm very worried about what's going on in Syria. The world is ignoring one of the great humanitarian crises of the 21st century. We're all sitting on the sidelines as people in Idlib get slaughtered. I would urge the president to up his game, to declare a no-fly zone, to protect the women and children of Idlib from being massacred. The Russians and the Assad regime need to be held accountable by the international community. It's just not the United States, it's the entire world. And it really breaks my heart, and we'll pay a heavy price for this. There'll be millions of refugees flowing out of Idlib into Turkey. I appreciate what Turkey is doing, standing up to Assad and Russia, but we should be coming down really hard on the Russian use of air power and the Assad's regime's indiscriminate bombing of women and children, innocent civilians. And I would urge the president to up his game, because we're sitting on the sidelines while a massacre is taking place, and it will affect our national security.
People are fleeing under horrendous conditions. Many are on foot or on the backs of trucks in below freezing temperatures, in the rain and in the snow. They're moving into increasingly crowded areas they think will be safer. But in Idlib, nowhere is safe. Almost 50,000 are sheltering under trees or in other open spaces. I am getting daily reports of babies and other young children dying in the cold.
We will continue to respond by all necessary means. As President Erdogan has announced, Turkey will hit all targets that pose an immediate threat. We will not withdraw our forces, and we will not abandon our observation posts. It is the regime who should withdraw from its current positions until the end of this month. I would like to underline once again that Turkish forces are in Idlib to stabilize the situation and to preserve the de-escalation area status of this province.
Therefore, I understand that the Turkish government and President Erdogan expect more from Europe. At the same time, I find it unacceptable that he, President Erdogan, and his government doesn't take up this dissatisfaction, but instead puts it on the backs of the refugees. That, for me, is not the way, and thus we will further talk with Turkey, with the Turkish government.
The Hot Zone is produced by Amy Holton and Livefire Media. Copyright 2019.